I love dinosaurs. This is my favorite coffee mug. This is my favorite teacup. This, my favorite t-shirt. And this, my favorite dinosaur-related Lego, my Lego T-Rex. My favorite dinosaur is the T-Rex, for obvious reasons I would hope. The T-Rex is goated, and if you disagree, then explain this. He literally eats a goat as a power play. Now, I did recently go and see Jurassic World Rebirth, and here is my quick summary. And with that out of the way, let's make a toothy dinosaur my carnivorous confidants. Well, the mutant D-Rex to be specific. And the only reference that I had to work with was the toy reviews on YouTube because all the trailer footage was of the D-Rex in the dark, surrounded by smoke. But I figure I'll have a better idea of what it looks like once I see the movie and they show me more of the D-Rex that's not in the trailer, right? Right?
Wrong.
Now, have you ever wondered what would happen if you crossed a beluga whale, a T-Rex, a silverback gorilla with the color scheme of Pikachu? No? Well, that, my friend, is why you will never make it in Hollywood. That's the kind of forward thinking that we need in 2025, and if you stopped at T-Rex genes mixed with frog genes, maybe you can find a job at Lucasfilm. That aside, you can see that I've bulked up the body with the requisite aluminium innards and a wee bit of masking tape. This all receives a seductive rub down of bacon bond before we apply our base layer of clay. The clay that I use is super sculpty and I am super keen to try out cosplay one of these days, but you cannot get it in my town that is masquerading as a city. Christchurch. Now, this is the first time that I've ever used aluminium wire over steel on a sculpt, and it is so soft that the base layer of clay caused it to buckle under the weight of our walking phallus. And for this reason, we'll have to conduct some minor surgery by way of removing the clay and reinforcing the legs and the arms with steel. I can then take the clay that I cut off earlier and reapply it and check out the structure, and it is working a lot better now. I'm happy with that, so now we can move on to the bulking of the head. And this being a family-friendly show, I think I might actually have to blur this bit out. For this segment, I'll be building up the upper jaw initially and the lower jaw a little bit later, but first I'll turn my attention to the spine of Alana. We'll be calling the D-Rex Alana from here on, for what I hope will be obvious reasons. For all my Gen Zers in the room,
Alan!
Yes, that is a thing that happened way back in 2001, but as all species in Jurassic Park are inherently female, we'll be going with Alana. The spine, as you can see, has been blended in and rolled over with my big blue stylus, and I have begun to add the skin folds where I think they might go as a bit of a trial run. Remember, as this giant puppy is becoming chonkier by the minute, I'm opting to further bulk out the tail as I grossly underestimated just how much clay I would need for this, and in an effort to raise money, I had to go busking downtown till people paid me to stop. And yet,
I am never gonna financially recover from this.
now that the tail is sufficiently integrated, we can start detailing this girl's impressive dome, which I've heard people compare to H.R. Geiger's Xenomorphs, but I strongly disagree and am firmly in camp beluga whale. I'll then carve in a crooked mouth while testing my animation skills for the first time, and I think we can all admit it's perfection. I'll poke in a future eyeball position, and with a blade I shall carve open the mouth in such a way that it reminds me of a certain scene from Upgrade that I 100% cannot show here, for what I hope for obvious reasons for anyone familiar with that film. In a "the caller was in the house the whole time" level twist, the lower jaw will be made out of wire that is wrapped in smaller wire. And with very sticky fingers, I'll add the jaw and begin to refine the shape of the face with some scraping tools, adding and removing bits and bobs as I find appropriate because, truth be told, at the time of sculpting Alana, I had not seen the film. And in hindsight, that wouldn't really have helped all that much anyway. I think the shape of the head is starting to look the part, but they always do look a little bit funny when they're this gummy. give a little extra attention to the upper lip and begin the process of making the mouth concave by scraping at the excess clay on the roof of the mouth and the floor of the mouth. She can then receive a silicone smoothing, and I'll notice she's a bit too streamlined and the torso will need a little extra bulk. I can do the same to the dome before I realise that I'm working in the dark here.
Look to my coming at first light on the 5th day.
I'll add what I assume is the dinosaur's sternocleidomastoid, blend that in, and then I can make some neck folds with a loopy scrapey tool that I can soften out with a silicone shaper, and then I can get on to making a series of tiny teeth. Start off as a ball, and then I can pick out a little piece and roll that up. I can roll out one of many and then add that to all his brothers and sisters and batch bake them because the hard clay is easy to push into the soft gums. And to add said teeth into said gums, I simply use a small stylus to poke in the receiving holes, and then I dip the tip of the tooth into some bacon bond and insert wherever appropriate. Any leftover eyes, teeth, claws and greeblies that I may have lying around, I keep in a little medicine tracker box, like this. And this is one of my eyeballs, which I can push into the eye socket, and then I can take a little noodly bit of clay and I can add the eyelids where appropriate. I can blend them in, and then with a sharp silicone shaper I can push the eyelids back off the eyeball, giving us a nice angry stare. Moving over to the legs, I'll score in some striations to the upper thigh with a hook tool and smooth these out with a cone head shaper. These shapers come generally in 3 colours and vary in firmness, with the white being the softest, the blue is medium and the black is hard. I'll add the requisite noodly doodads to the body haphazardly in the areas I think that a fictional mutated beluga whale gorilla T-Rex hybrid would have them. Seriously guys, what happened to this franchise? I'm currently reading the original Jurassic Park for the 3rd time as a palate cleanser after watching Rebirth, and that book goes hard. In the opening 20 pages, a Costa Rican baby in a maternity ward is eaten in its crib by several compies, only for the midwife to report it as sudden infant death syndrome because she doesn't want to be accused of being bad at her job. That is the thing that happened. Also, Gennaro was a badass. It was Ed Regis who left the kids alone on the Land Cruiser. Hammond, for all intents and purposes, is the human villain of the story. Lex is Tim's little sister. The sick Triceratops was swapped for some reason as it's the Stegosaurus in the book, and the raft scene from Rebirth is actually the raft scene from Jurassic Park. I'm guessing the Triceratops was smaller to make as the Triceratops were manually operated. There were literal people from ILM inside the Triceratops operating the eyes, the tongue, and the breathing, all by hand. I miss practical effects. The fingers can then all be added to the main body of the hand. I'll blend them in with a ball stylus before going ahead and adding in the top knuckles, and then I can add a series of knuckles all the way down each finger. I can blend them in before turning my attention to the left hand, which needs a little bit extra bulk because it just didn't look right. And you know what guys, that's the great thing about working with clay on YouTube. There is literally zero risk here. If you have some free time and you want to share your hobby with a load of strangers on the internet, then fill your boots. The comments section is 99% lovely, and the mean comments, well, they're just more perplexing than actually offensive. It's just clay, guys. Just clay. And with that said, I've added the fingers in such a way to demonstrate that Alana is indeed a knuckle walker. At least, I believe that's how she was marketed, only for this particular trait to be retroactively reset to the prototypical foot position in the movie. Speaking of feet, I've added the foot fingers to the hind quarters, within which I can insert a trio of pre-baked claws before deciding her toes were piano player toes and needed a reduction. I'll simply chop off the toes and repeat the process one more time on this foot before repeating the process one more time again on the opposite foot, which was a far more awkward process, but we got there in the end. Together. A quick twirl for the girls and I can proceed to adding Alana's opposable thumbs? Maybe this lizard whale does have some primate genes. And with the thumbs in place, I'm going to call the sculpt good and move on to the texture. And for this I have a metal scrapey tool, a loopy scrapey doodad, a silicone stabby tool, some stampy clay implements, and some softening saran wrap for a fistful of alliteration. First up, I John Wick Alana with the cling film before I start etching in the leathery skin details. The cling film, saran wrap, glad wrap, whatever you like, will act as a softening membrane between the clay and the metal, which will allow us to scrape and scratch to our heart's content without risk of leaving very harsh trench lines in the clay. Essentially, it just gives us a more natural texture. I'll then meticulously craft the remaining skin on what will no doubt be my seminal piece in a foray toward dinosaur sculpting, all the while listening to the cascading song of My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding in the background. And with the body looking as leathery as a 20-year-old Australian who rebels against the importance of a good skincare routine, I can now move on to stage 2 of the texturing process, which involves a little clay roller that I made on a previous video or off camera. Who's to say? These little rollers and stamps have the inverse of the pattern I want to create. To make them, you simply take a small bit of clay and poke it over and over and over again like you know what you're doing, and then walk away grossly unsatisfied with the result. The toes can then be graced with their armoured carapace, which I will stab ever so softly, hundreds of times with a little ball stylus for no one but yours truly to ever really appreciate. I'll give her face the same dimple texture, head on out to see Jurassic World Rebirth, and then realize that, of course, she has nose holes. So I will retroactively add the nostrils, and from this angle she is looking a bit savage. I like it. And for the finishing touches, I've made a couple of hundred tiny balls to add to the skin for surface texture. But wait, who's this handsome fellow?
Hello, no!
And as I add these balls, let me know in the comments section, which is your favorite Jurassic Park movie? Or probably an easier question, what is your second favorite Jurassic Park movie? Or better still, what do you think is the worst? If you said Dominion, you'd be correct. If like me, you were a kid when you saw the original, where were you when you saw the T-Rex escape for the first time? I was in a cinema called The Classic in Harold's Cross in Dublin, with my dad. Did the Dilophosaurus scare you? Cause it didn't scare me. That's for sure. And just like your average Irishman on a Saturday night, we'll give Alana a healthy bath of alcohol to remove any of the fingerprints and other offending tool marks. And just like that, she's 90% sculpted and can go into the oven at 130 degrees Celsius or the flash point of biodiesel in Fahrenheit for 30 minutes and left to cool down for a couple of hours. Once cooled, I'll focus my attention on the little T-Rex forelimbs, which are just a single piece of wire wound back on itself and then clipped to make the fingers to size. I've opted for a dual anchor point to try and avert any limb rotation on this one. Once form fit, I'll glue them in place with the most overpriced product I have ever found. Then, in the usual manner, I'll add some tiny arms with my regular arms. This process can only be described as finicky, and I hate it. And I never want to do it again, as Alana's big, girthy gorilla arms were apt to stymie my progress. But once the claws are in place, she can go in for one final bake where she will inevitably lose a foot to dino diabetes. Though this has me worried not, for I simply treat the foot like I treat my emotions, and I hide the damage. Anyway, I wanted the base to be MDF, as XPS bases just feel a little light to the touch, just a little cheap. But alas, this is probably my largest sculpt to date, and I don't have a base big enough, so XPS it is. I'll make a rough terrain out of several pieces of XPS foam, which I can simply hack away at with a little scalpel, and then I can glue them into position with my glue gun, and then we can move on to priming. In order to stop any paint getting onto my cork bases, I'll cover that in a layer of cling film, and then I will import Alana into Photoshop. I'll magnetic lasso her, and I'll use the level tool to prime her white. I'll have to have a more hands-on approach for the base, which I will just smack a bit of black onto, and we're all done with the priming. Now Alana will still have some of the armature sticking out the base of her feet, so I will press her into the base, which will leave me her little footholes, so I know the position she can go back into. And then I'll use some hole filler to fill the gaps where the foam doesn't quite meet cleanly. I can then go to my real job and leave that to cure for several hours. To paint Alana, I'm laying down an initial uniform base layer, which is a very fleshy tone. Said base layer is composed of paint, flow improver, and water, and once dry I'll cover the majority of the skin with a yellow. I know it looks a bit vibrant now, but we'll knock that back with a wash later. In an attempt to have a nice gradient between the top and the bottom tones, I'll use a couple of sponges and a square edge paintbrush to blend in the two, and I very much am left with a bananasaurus. It's then time to sponge on the darker patterns with a burnt umber acrylic. I'm using a reverse tweezers to hold the sponge, which I highly recommend if, like me, you're someone that hates first world problems such as, you mean I have to squeeze my own tweezers to paint my $150 D-Rex before eating a ribeye with my sassy Shiraz while watching Ryan and Haley travel 50 states in 50 days? What? But I digress. I'll sponge on the sexy rubber gloves, which are a clear representation of hidden misogyny in dinosaur movies.
Make me a raptor sandwich, Alana, with a side of evil corporate middle-aged white guy.
After a sandwich, I'll add some darker tones around the eyes, and with a ball stylus, I'll dot on a plethora of little dark spots, which I'll have to redo as I dry brush them into oblivion later. With the base layer all done, next up I'll mix water, flow improver, and a leathery brown paint to make a wash that I coat all the midtones with. I'll allow this to settle for a couple of minutes till the paint is a little tacky, and then I'll wipe off the topmost layer with a paper towel. I'll then give the underbelly much the same treatment in a sandy tone before dry brushing all the midtones with a light dusting of bone white. I'll put the skin aside for a moment and then get to work on the fleshy mouth. Huh. Why is there a Snickers in my video? That's it's bizarre. Strange. I'll paint the inside of said mouth with a mixture of pinks, purples, reds and browns, all of which came out far too vibrant, but lucky for me, I'm really good at Photoshop and will edit the thumbnail accordingly. I paint the teeth in a bone white, and then I paint the eyeballs in a sunflower yellow, and this here highlights the true importance of iris placement, because she went from looking positively world-endingly savage to derpy as. I of course won't realize this due to the compound interest of a full-time job, lack of sleep, and a severe caffeine addiction. My blood runs thick with multiple double espressos per day. Meanwhile, Alana's teeth have been coated in a very thinned out leather brown and given a slight rub at the tip with a cotton bud and lightly brushed with a bone white at the tip once again. And, as previously stated, I'll redo all the spots on the skin before gluing in a pre-baked tongue I made off camera. The mouth then gets a high gloss varnish and the eyes a coat of UV resin, and then we're done with Alana and we are moving on to the base. For the base I'll need some hole filler. I got this nice grey one because they didn't have any white. I'll also need a trio of earthy tones, varying from light to dark brown. And I'll also need a couple of gravels, one sand and one a little coarser. And finally, good old Greek natural yogurt and a stir stick. I'll mix all this together and I will add brown until I get the colour that I want, and though it looks delicious, it smells disgusting. But I will bring in our primed and dry base that has been hole filled and sanded down at the sides, and I can just start basting on this top layer. I'll spread it around all willy-nilly with the stir stick at first and then with a gloved hand to get into all those corners. And then to give it a little bit of an earthy texture, I will bring in some rocks and I can just tap away, just hammer away, have a little bit of fun with it. We can then bring the star of the show back in and impress her into the hole filler so that we know where she's going later. I'll then add in some extra rocks and some gravel over top. I'll fix the gravel in place with some watered down PVA and ho ho! M&M's! Ho ho ho! Snickers! What's this? New tools. And that, my friends, is how subtle Jurassic World Rebirth is with its product placement. And its writing for that matter. Do you remember the eye scene from Jurassic Park? Do you remember the hunt for Jaws? Do you remember the flares? Do you remember the kitchen scene? Do you remember the sauropods?
I remember all of them.
Me too, Bucky. Me too. How many tangents must one man have on a video? Ah, this is taking forever. Okay, so we got a trio of earthy paints which have been watered down. I got this from the terrain tutor, and I've got a green, a red, and a burnt umber, and I have liberally washed the base and given that ample time to dry overnight. And then I can finally give it a ferocious dry brush with a bone white, and then a much softer dry brush with a dead white, just to really catch those edges. I'll trail on some PVA glue to the green areas that I can stab vigorously with a dinosaur makeup brush and sprinkle on a layer of grass flocking. I always like to throw on a thicker layer of this grass foliage, and then once it's dried I can turn the base upside down, tap off the excess and collect it to use at a later date. Once dry, I'll scatter on some thicker foliage to the areas that are looking a wee bit barren. To add some long grass, I'll use a drill bit to make a hole in the XPS, and I can fill that with a little bit of PVA glue, within which I can insert my tall grass. I'll add just enough of these to make the glamour shots look good, and I will call the base done. For the finishing touches, I'll use some Yoo-hoo glue to slobber up Alana's feeding hole, paint the edges black, place Alana into position, and we are finally done here, and welcome to Jurassic Park. As always, a big old thank you for tuning in today. I do hope you enjoyed my interpretation of the Distortus Rex. Must have been Bring Your Kid to Work Day when they named that one, eh? Do like the video if you liked it, share, subscribe if you want to see more of what I do around here, and until next time, go make a mess.
That's a laser raptor. I thought they went extinct thousands of years ago.